some slides to get us going. So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiardjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is what we do every Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock to help us get through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side. So if you want to know who are the panelists, they're all listed on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do interact with us on the Zoom chat or Q&A as you see fit, and please do complete the survey at the end. And also, just as a reminder, this slide deck that I'm showing is on mondaylive.org as well. So if there are any links mentioned, the team will have actually put it on the slide deck, and you'll have access to that. Actually now, if you want that. So a few slides, or actually the agenda. So we'll have a chit chat about what's going on. The main sort of topic really is how COVID has accelerated the adoption of edge computing. I think there'll be an interesting discussion there today. A few slides. Roger has, I think it's a good thing. It's a good news. We'll talk about this when we get to after the slides. Mark has some good news, so yay. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, about the market size of BAS, which is great. John, not so good news, but
one of each.
Okay, so
we cancel each other out.
That's right.
And Ken, I'm sure will talk to us a little bit about what he's doing in December's issue. Anto talking about edge analytics, which is great. And this is the only thing I can think of putting up there, because obviously there is some good news in terms of potential vaccines, and I thought that's the only thing I can come up with. So.
And not a train light in sight coming at us.
Yeah. Indeed not. Who wants to start? Roger, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just put that in. What it was a survey that, a study that PwC have released, but shows back to 2019, where it shows the US have got, about 4 or 5 times more retail outlets per person than Europe and other places. Canada's quite high, but really Europe are sort of on 5 and US on about 23, 24. And it's actually saying that, the message I think that's coming through is maybe, it was, as the word was said, was over retailed. And whether all that's happened is the pandemic has kind of, as we talked about before, precipitated some of these changes that were going to happen. They're kind of saying, as soon as the crossroads went up on all 4 corners, there were strip malls went up on all 4 sides. And really, did it need it? Was it truthfully something that was needed? And it's just saying that perhaps it was already overcooked, and maybe the reduction on some of these will make a lot more sense to bring it back in time. And all that's happening is a reality check on how much retail you really need.
That's an interesting angle. Coming from Europe, I do see that, having lived here for a while, that is way.
The US is miles ahead of everywhere else in the world in the number of retail outlets per head. Whether that's actually needed, I guess, is the question. Presumably not, if that's going to reduce, and that's what's happening during this period. I don't have the stats of what's been. Obviously, we've seen some of the big ones, but I don't know the number of casualties in the little ones in the strip malls. I mean, you guys seeing much shutting down those smaller shops, or are they surviving? Or
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just driving down the street, it's hard to tell whether they're shutting down in the long term.
We're seeing here in Texas, we're seeing some repurposing of the strip malls. The stores are getting out, but they're being repurposed into all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, which is what it suggests in the study, that it's more repurposing.
Well, it was interesting. I drove by one of the premier malls, outdoor type malls here in Richmond, Virginia, and I noticed in vacant places where retail stores were, there is now a Dock in the Box, there is now a new dentist, and there is a new optometrist. So it seems like the medical community is adopting some of these retail locations.
Yeah, which is what the report says, a lot of medical stuff and yoga and sort of gyms and, much more sort of changing of the use of the buildings, yeah.
So then, Roger, if this group takes a collection together to get you a hot yoga class, would you take it?
Oh yeah, I'll be downward dogging if you actually give it that.
So Anna, we were talking about Asia just on the pre-show little chat, and obviously Asia, one of the things about Asia is they're very big into retail. Is this something that they should learn from, maybe?
Well, there's the big difference is you don't see the strip malls that we have here, right? Retail tends to be concentrated in large shopping malls. A lot of it is because of climate more than anything else, right? I mean, you're talking either extreme hot or cold climates, and so large shopping malls make sense from a climate perspective, whereas here strip malls, most of the country you can do that. And then space is the other one. So, they go up and not out. Having said that, I would have thought that, oddly enough, I would have thought the density was higher there than it was here in the US, per capita. But shopping there is a pastime, right? I mean, that's what you do on the weekends. So I don't see any decline. I mean, the shopping malls are not like here in the US where the malls are, the big stores. What was it I heard just the other day? Wasn't it Simon Malls got acquired by, who was it? The other big guys. Somebody just acquired.
Brookfield bought them, I think.
Brookfield, thank you, Roger. Brookfield just bought Simon Malls, right? And Penny's is moving out, and so there's a bit of a decline in the malls in the APAC region. The malls are thriving. You rarely see malls in the state of depression that we see them here, where they kind of disappear and we build another one across the road.
Yeah, they just get old here. They don't disappear. But
yeah.
Mark, you have some good news.
Hey, for a change, there's 3 items on there. One, again, keeping politics out of this conversation, please. That, in the Biden plan, he has started to discuss and has promised to get back into the climate change. I think we all know that, and it's got some new policies. But the main thing is that his current plan calls for upgrading 4 million buildings. And again, I don't know if that's government buildings. Is it the private sector? Is it a combination of both? My guess it's obviously a combination of both. So I think that most definitely is boding well for our industry. Second one was how what's the analysts say, and they're predicting that we're going to go from roughly 75 billion BAS market in 2019 and to 2020 to over 121 billion by 2024, which averages out to roughly about a 10% average increase each and every year. And then that final one was, which I thought was interesting, that it seems like construction starts are starting up again. So all good news for all of us on this call in this industry.
But do we really believe the BAS will grow that much?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Whose report was that? Whose report was that?
I can't remember who it was. It might have been Bisro's or somebody. I don't remember who it was.
because all the other sort of reports are suggesting that, you know, new construction will go down perhaps because there's not going to be as much demand for real estate whilst the shift in work patterns have changed.
Exactly. So it's, you know, who are you going to believe?
Yeah, I know.
You know,
And anybody is struggling to crystal ball gaze at the moment.
yeah.
John,
You saw the same thing Mark did, that, you know, that the new administration is talking about standards for buildings that should be helpful, right? I think that's a good thing, the focus, and even, you know, that may make it easier for the government agencies to continue with their plans or accelerate their plans. So yeah, I see some hope there. You know, the other thing is, you know, the retail, certainly a lot of doomsayers out there in a lot of retail space. I don't think it's shaken out yet, and how it's going to, you know, affect everybody when those strip malls are, you know, it's, someone said driving by, you can't tell whether they're temporarily closed or they're closed permanently, right? That's still hard to tell. And part of the reason is I'm not trying to go to any of them yet, you know, so unclear.
Ken, you want to tell us what's going on in December?
Yeah, okay. Our theme for December is requesting innovation, and I kind of moved forward by moving back. My background way back in the old days of DDC was to use the request for proposal to basically draw innovation out, and I think we're in another rapid innovation growth period, and so I'm kind of suggesting that we can maybe dust that off and use it, and the fact that we can portray all of this innovation remotely and actually see demos and quickly communicate what's going on globally, I think is exciting stuff. So I think we need to, as an industry, we need to start requesting innovation. And I'm actually pointing to the old method that we used, which was a request for proposal rather than the bid and spec. And basically what we did there is we plucked the controls out of the project and held a prime cost sum for them. And we held it off for the building cycle, which was usually about 3 years in a good sized project. Because if you actually specified anything 3 years ago, it was obsolete. So what we did is then we would ask for the latest and greatest innovations, and we would then do that. It takes obviously an owner that's committed to the concept. But anyway, so that's just some of the ideas that we're going to be kicking around in our December issue. I chat a little bit more about that in a control trends video if you want to listen to that. The other thing that I found intriguing is your subject matter, I think, is right on for this Monday, wanting to talk about the edge, because we floated this LinkedIn post out on the Raspberry controller, and we got some 4,700 views of it, and some great discussions, and 30, 40 people buying in. So I think there's a lot of interest. There's this whole idea of the powerful edge controllers communicating with large databases is starting to becoming a evolving model, and is part of what I think the innovation is.
That's great. I love that, requesting innovation.
The innovation thing is interesting, Ken. Again, just tying back to APAC for a moment, we just put a big proposal together for a government agency in Singapore, where it came out as an RFP, yet 70 points for the RFP analysis was based on the innovativeness of the proposal, and 30 points was based on the pricing. Yeah, they do the weighting average stuff. It was really cleverly done. I'd never seen it that heavily weighted over to the innovative side as opposed to pricing.
Actually, when in the old days of DDC, it was how we learned. We would learn about new products, and then they would, the other piece of a request for proposal is the mandatory requirements. And what we would do then is we keep raising the bars up. So we would go out for a request for proposal. We'd get a product we'd never even heard of. We would actually install it and see if it would work. We also had some interesting financial things. We didn't pay anything until the project was approved. We basically did not allow progress payments and they had to go through a 7-day test, and we accepted it. And then we paid them all of their money. And they cursed it at the start, but they actually came to like it because they said ours were the only projects they actually ever finished because they didn't get paid until they got finished. So that spurred innovation on. But what it allowed us to do is then we cherry picked the innovation features that we thought were important, and we put them back into our mandatory requirements. And then the next time out, the next request for proposal, it was like, man, if you can't do that, you can't even play the game. So it really pushed innovation. And I think we're at that stage that we could do that again.
So maybe we need to marry this with the previous conversation about the new administration, and maybe they will include that, maybe not 70%, but some percentage of proposals being innovation led. I don't know.
I think the other important thing I think is that the remoteness and the ability to communicate this, we did this, I'm talking about doing this, and the article I pointed to was written in 2001. So it's a little old and dusty as I am, but we were able to achieve that. And the internet had just started up. And the first thing we did is we put our manual, our request for proposal manual on the internet. That was one of the very first things we put on the internet. So now that everything's Zoom and the communication of concept is so much easier, I think we now can do that. We can now take a look at what they're doing in Singapore and say, wow, that is really great. I don't want all of that, but I want that feature and roll that into our request for proposal.
Don't forget, a lot of innovation is push rather than pull. And, you know, I guess you can witness that with the kind of amount of activity that's going on with the digital twin thing at the moment, which suddenly seems to have, you know, really come to the fore. And I noticed today Bentley Systems have said, hey, we're going to create a fund for $100 million for invest in digital twin companies. So, you know, it's not always being specified. Most innovation comes from the ground up, right?
We're having a giant collision of traditional and non-traditional, and IT and non-IT, and all of this big melding pot. There's a whole bunch of stuff floating around, and concepts are completely different. The approaches are completely different. So you have to let go of a specification because you have no idea what it is you're specifying. You're basically looking for a result. So you have to basically refocus on the result.
Let us move on to the subject of edge. Alpa, you're kind of the most sort of vocal proponent of edge, certainly in this group. Do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I'll start it from the perspective of data. And we basically do analytics, and we know what it takes to get clean data into the cloud. It takes 60 to 70% of the time energy used is to get clean data to the cloud. And the edge computing and edge analytics, doing everything at the edge, we basically trend the data between what I call the metal and the silicon. And you don't have data going way too many places before it gets stored. And this enables for us to have clean data. And on top of it, distributing the computing within the edge devices also gets us to create these actionable items much quicker than doing it in the cloud. So as a whole perspective, as a technology change, I do believe this would be the third revolution in smart buildings. I haven't seen the pneumatic times. I entered into the DDC probably within the middle of it, and having the edge computing capabilities within the devices will be the third revolution that our industry will see. That is my 2 cents.
So a question for you, Alpa, is that really for me, edge is perhaps, you know, when you think about BAS, we've already got sensors everywhere. You've got temperature sensors everywhere. You've got a controlling plant. You kind of already got a mini IoT on in the building itself. It's just the edge parts aren't intelligent. So we're actually, I assume you're thinking that the components have become more intelligent and skip the middleware bit to get it to the cloud. And then perhaps the growth in edge devices is going to be coming from, I guess, newer services that are required, like space management, air quality, with additional things that might be added in, because there's probably already enough for metering, temperature sensing, humidity with dumb sensors at the moment, just gathered and put into a controller and then shipped out and back to a supervisor. Is your perception that the devices and maybe the equipment will then just get smarter and bypass that middleware and just get straight to the cloud?
That is correct.
And that's technically, that's still edge computing, right? You're just distributing the intelligence to the devices rather than having a central gateway or processor involved.
Yep.
The intelligence is in the device itself at the device level.
Yeah.
We've been in it since 2015, and in fact have a whole complete product portfolio based on edge and edge computing. And kind of where we see it is, I think you got to look at you got to have a definition of what is the edge. And I kind of look at it is that it's a means to connect, collect, and process data where the action actually takes place, which is, again, that device level, and rather than relying on a middleware or a cloud type environment. And for us, we noticed it, as I said, back in 2015, and what really it drove edge computing and edge within the built environment is, I think, and I think this group might agree, is the variety of and breadth of connectivity options we now have available to us. IP and IoT push, the amount of data volume that we are able to get and ascertain from systems and devices, and to your point, Roger, more sensors, so forth and so on. The insufficient bandwidth that now is starting to occur with trying to get this data from point A to point B within a cyber-secured environment. And the fact that we've seen a lot more applications be developed and added to places, the edge, if you will. And then the cost and the affordability of edge devices, controllers, devices, whatever, have significantly come down because the cost of processing has dropped. And I think, we all talked about, in this group, how open systems have, really led our industry to new path, to new innovations, Ken Sinclair, and so forth and so on. And I think that that has a lot to do with it. And, I'm often asked is that, from the COVID perspective, it's definitely, I see it, is the increase of the use of more and more sensors and being able to get analytics and that real-time data. And that's what's kind of from the COVID perspective. And I'll just leave it with this is, do I think edge will replace the cloud? Absolutely not. I think they will be in tandem with each other. And one of the buzzwords that has come out of this whole COVID thing in our industry is the word hybrid. And I think you'll see our buildings be a hybrid model of edge and cloud.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that, because I think one of the things we can do to clarify this and to help, why is talking about the edge important? And I think one of the reasons is the tendency to think either or. And I'll relate to past experience. First time I ran into this, when I was at Tritium, we had one of the first LawnWorks network tools outside of what Echelon had. And so we'd go and talk about it, and people would say, oh, so you support LawnWorks, so you're anti-BACnet, right? I'm like, where'd that come from, right? And then we had BACnet tools, and you'd go to, oh, so you're anti-lawn. Wait, well, why? And I sense there's a similar thing about the cloud. The cloud's not going away, but the cloud doesn't do everything effectively. There are reasons for data collection, computing, analytics to happen at all levels of the system. I think one of the reasons it's important to talk about the edge is there's a lot more ability to do that now, and to overcome the hype around cloud as a solution to, everything, including world hunger, right? I think it's oversold on that it can solve every single problem, right? And, just a couple of points, greater fault tolerance is a reason we see people wanting to deploy at the edge, right? We've been on this call for months. People drop out, networks go down. Well, there are mission critical applications where you can't lose your data. You can't lose your data feed. Those need to happen at the edge, right? But it isn't just about, getting the data to the cloud. It might be the user. Think about someone sitting in an equipment room. The chiller is 15 feet away, but his method of looking at what's happening at the chiller has to go up outside the building over the internet to the cloud, right? And something goes wrong and he can't tell what's happening with his major equipment, right? That's another fault tolerance reason to consider where can the data collection, the computing, processing, and even the visualization, where can it be served best?
Yeah, I'd like
I want to,
John, the BACnet journal is out now, and there's some great articles in there, and I think we have to better understand from whence we came, and we're always working, we're always quick to point out our failures, but we seldom look back and celebrate our successes, and BACnet certainly is one of our successes. And the fact that that is basically an underpinning of all of this, all of us on this screen understand that any kind of an edge controller has to do everything the old controller did, plus all of the new things that Alper envisions it doing, and some of the standardizations of databases, all of these things. But in the final analysis, when the internet is not there, communications is severed, the device has to keep on functioning like those old panels of yesteryear. And so that's probably the thing that we understand better than the IoT people. And I think we have to keep pushing that message. And like, as you say, Mark, you've had your controllers for all those years, but they actually, if I go and unplug the network from them, they keep on doing what the old controllers do, even better. And now what we're starting to do on the edge is we're starting to see the inference of self-learning and AI, artificial intelligence, starting to come right down into these controllers because they are in fact so powerful. They have way more power than the original panels. If you take a look at the processors in most of the 10 and 20-year-old panels that are running out there, any one of these edge controllers could knock their socks off. So I think we have to kind of take a look, get that basic stuff in there. And as I mentioned, take a quick look at the BACnet journal. There's some great articles in there.
I want to kind of come out. I'm sorry, Teresa.
I was just going to support everything Ken was saying with an example we don't often talk about in this group, but lighting. Because I think that in terms of edge, it's one of the easiest ones to really capture quickly, that you would want some of the edge lighting devices, edge sensor packs to make personalized spaces for whoever was sitting under that light. So you might want analytics that said this person is here, they get migraines, so we're going to lower the light whenever they're here. You could load those sorts of rules to personalize that lighting for that person, and then whether it was connected to the cloud or not, that could happen because that small set of rules is right up in that sensor pack, imagining it over their head. But if you wanted to do how much energy was saved over the course of several months because lights were dimmed, including this person with the migraine, to get that full view of lighting across the building or across the portfolio, of course, that would all have to go to the cloud. But just that idea of like, when I'm sitting here, I want the lights to be at this set it at this luminance, that could happen for months without it ever going to the cloud. And that's an easy one for me to understand, the differentiation.
I think
I'm
that's Reeves, I think the challenge is like you got a light in your bike shed, right? You got lights everywhere. So they're best place for connectivity. The challenge, certainly here in Europe, is that lighting and BAS sit under two different contractual chains. And that's not happening because people have been talking about this for a while, and combining the two is just not happening at the pace anyone would wish it could do. So that you can get access to more information. And so really it's more about the contractual chain getting in the way of the technology.
I want to come from a different perspective. Sorry, Tracy.
Well, go ahead. I just didn't want to change the subject too far away. So
no, the same perspective, but rather than from a resilience and network redundancy, and that more from a more data perspective, right? That by moving analytics to the edge, you take, and one of the big case study or big examples of that is video, right? There's just a lot of video being pushed to the edge and analytics of video. Video produces just volumes of data, and edge analytics on video makes the most sense from a perspective of AI, machine learning, facial recognition. Literally just a month ago, I bought a little module from embedded processor with camera and AI and machine learning that can differentiate my cat, my dog, and me, all for $20 from China. And I'm sure it's sending all sorts of information to China as well. But video analytics, and when you think about it, the amount of cameras that we have even in our houses today, I've got 2 Nest cameras, I've got 3 Ring cameras, the amount of video analytics that gets processed. When you start thinking about the cost of video cameras, they're nothing now as far as embedded cameras and processors and Raspberry Pis and stuff. That when you start, okay, I can do different types of things, and the big one, of course, is occupancy. People are all heavily focused on occupancy. We just tie back to COVID for a moment, right? Occupancy analysis and how many people is a real challenge today. And people don't want to do it with their phones because they're not giving up the privacy of their phone. So, video analytics is a natural application of occupancy, and you can do that relatively benignly because you're just counting people and stuff. And again, that's a great example of where what we're seeing is what's pushing edge analytics is video and occupancy counting because of COVID, because more data is coming up from cameras than a temperature sensor ever will generate.
Tracy, you want to pick up?
yeah, if I could, because I wanted to go back to what John was saying, which I agree with, that it's not an either or, it's an evolution of the combination of edge and cloud over time. If you look at the trends that kind of started all of this, and we touched on a few of them, one is, more affordable, powerful compute power that we can push to the edge. And anyone who's been around, distributed controls for any length of time has come to the realization that moving processing power as close to the end of the line as possible is the most efficient way to deal with things typically. So that trend continues, right? It's just like Anto said, $20 for an AI device that can do all that now. The second thing is the networking, right? Whether it be Lawnworks or BACnet or Modbus or whatever, pick your network, Wi-Fi or Ethernet. The communication capability is a bi-directional trend. The better that gets, the more feasible cloud computing will become on certain things. But the better that gets, the better edge computing and localization will become as well, right? And then a lot of this is application driven, to Teresa's point. And I'll give you an even simpler example. Putting lighting schedules in the cloud is not a good thing. If your light system depends on getting a schedule from the cloud and you lose internet, you end up with parking lot lights on all day long, right? Or not coming on at night because your lighting system can't talk to the cloud. We have personal experience at that. That's how I understand that. So, and then tying this kind of back to the whole pandemic and how is the pandemic affecting this, which is what our topic kind of is today. And we started, Anto touched on that with occupancy in buildings and the collection of more temperature data and air movement. And, who knows what new sensing technologies are going to come out over the next, 12 to 24 months here in terms of tracking indoor air quality and so forth. So there seems to be an increased demand on on data in general in buildings and our ability to collect and analyze that information, and doing certain things locally on premise is more efficient, typically sorting through all that. To Anto's point about video, you can do that much better. So I think the pandemic has awakened kind of a new innovation cycle here for all of us. And it's going to just drive more and more edge computing application, I think, over time. But I think as the networks and the speeds improve, we're going to drag cloud computing along with this in parallel. I don't see this as an either or at all. It's one driving the other, just like the power of a processor versus the needs of an OS in a laptop, right? The bigger the processor, the better the OS can be. The bigger the OS, the more you need more computing power, right? Chicken and egg there.
I'd like to add to the video because we've been focusing on that, and it certainly is a powerful medium. But the other one that is rapidly approaching is the natural language, and the fact that that is coming out in edge devices such as Hey Google's and Amazon's Echo. What's happening underneath that is a handoff, and we're starting to see more power in that, and we're actually starting to see that natural voice module become an integral part of some of our edge controllers. And so what was started out as a relatively simple edge controller, now we talk to it in natural language. Another intriguing thing that just came across my mind was they were talking about how these natural language devices learn, and they actually learn from listening to thousands of people talk. And so it's an interesting way of learning because all of us somehow learned how to speak English from a dictionary or our parents or whatever. The point is this is a conglomeration. It has all kinds of slangs built into it. It has all kinds of things. So it's self-learning as an integral part of what it does. And that's kind of an amazing part. So anyway, the bunch of things happening. It's becoming, and again, it's incredibly inexpensive. You buy enough light bulbs, you get one of these things free. You can talk to your light bulbs. So, the interface module is not a deal breaker. If you wish your edge device to be talked to, you can do it. So it's another thing that's almost as exciting as the video. And I think the other side of that is it works extremely well with AI in the fact that you can now ask it questions and it can learn and it can offer suggestions, and you're starting to have this dialogue. It's a strange world for us, but I think ultimately it will become part of our toolkit.
So I'm wondering if we can turn to cybersecurity, because obviously everybody has to care about that, and edge in a way brings its own sort of twist on cybersecurity. And maybe Jim Lee and Steve Fay, you're kind of, out of all of us, are more focused on the cyber side of things.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Where I would start is trying to figure out what you're going to do. Distributed control applications have been around for 40 plus years. Everything that's been said on the conversation so far, I agree with. But if we're looking at where we're going to do innovation, we have to have an understanding of how we're going to collect data, standardize that data, and transport it. So if I'm looking at an analytics application in the cloud, I can quickly gather data and innovate in analytics in the cloud. However, the video kinds of aspects, speech recognition, other things that have been mentioned, are much better at the edge. But now I need the ability to push secure programs out to the edge to innovate and keep that technology fresh. So it's the ability to not only read data over wide area networks, but also to be able to modify the way we're collecting data so as to not limit applications in the future. And I think that in a number of the new technologies that the BACnet community is working on, we will have standard abilities to download those kinds of programs into different pieces of equipment.
And Steve, you want to follow on that, on the sort of how to keep track of all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, I guess before I talk about the cyber piece, I wanted to share the following thoughts around edge computing in general, which is adding additional devices, adding additional hardware because it's cheap and it's proliferating and it's powerful and all the rest of it to the existing stuff is an answer of how to get there. But, you know, we spent 20 plus years developing the BACnet standard so that we can share data effectively among these different systems. But the fundamental piece is that these controllers, without trying to step on what Mark's been saying in terms of what he's trying to do with LinkSpring, but our computers are all vendor specific and they're designed only to run the vendor software. So you can't take an edge algorithm, an edge software, and download it to anybody's device and have it run there. We've added all this horsepower to the controllers, the processor, the memory, but unlike an iPhone or an iPad or a general purpose piece of computing, I can't just install other people's software on a Honeywell, Johnson, Siemens device. And if it supported multiple algorithms and multiple types of software running in a virtual environment, all of a sudden I can make that device that was just installed to do temperature control. Now I can do analytics in addition. But the fundamental hardware software architecture today of all of our devices doesn't allow for that. So I think there's some real opportunity for innovation there to come out with hardware that is designed specifically to run more than just the native application, and you know, take what Tritium did and take it to a whole new level. I would say that's the challenge I give to the industry is so that you don't have to add additional equipment. You just simply download new software to those systems that support this type of computing architecture. So,
and of course, I should let Alper talk. What Tritium does, I mean, we're supporting everything that Mark is doing at LinkSpring, is to be able to have cybersecurity from the edge to the cloud, that any edge device that's running Niagara has the full Niagara cybersecurity backing. You know, the way we think about doing the product, the way we're working with our partners to make sure they're thinking about cybersecurity, that it's one tool to think edge to cloud, and including thinking about edge to cloud in terms of cyber.
Steve, a question for you. Do you think, though, that's a big challenge, bearing in mind how long it's even taken the controls industry to get some sort of standards together?
Right.
You're then talking about within a building, you know, we already talked about lighting, but then you talk about security, and as things get smarter, you've got to try and encourage the guy who makes the lock, who's going to make the lock, the end device, the edge device, the same open operating system as the guy who's got the lights, who's got the other parts in it. And I think there's going to be, unfortunately, still gateways there to be able to try and make this happen from all the different factions within a building.
Yes, so I want to add the Project SenStar in here. We basically integrated what CC Controls has done, Best Pi. We put the Project SenStar in it, and then it talks haystack northbound, and then you can do the analytics within the edge. So what you said, Steve, is pretty much here with Project Haystack capable devices. So it doesn't matter whose device. We are working with Project SenStar integrated into a power meter right now. We have already open sourced the indoor air quality sensor. So there is an open methodology to control, read, and write to these devices within haystack method.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's great. Is the question is, are any of the majors going to get behind that kind of an architecture and adopt it? But with regard to the cyber piece, I'd say, you know, if you have at the network layer, if you apply a zero trust networking environment, you got an 80% solution at least, because you know every user is only going to get to those downstream devices if they're a trusted user, period. So, I mean, it's nice to put a lot of protections into all the different controllers for the users and the setup and the rest of it. But frankly, you put in a zero trust networking environment where only trusted users and their devices are allowed in. It's unclear to me how much more protection the rest of it buys you once you put that in place. Now, if you're just going with a traditional like VPN connections, you almost need that second layer of defense. But when you have the ability to trust both the device and the user in a multi-factor type of environment, you really lock down your security in a big way. So I just suggest that as a way to perhaps think about this problem from a cyber perspective, as opposed to continuing to put more and more and more features into our protocols and into our UIs for security protection, because it assumes that anybody can get to the network. And frankly, if you can't get to the network, it's almost moot. It is moot. That's my argument.
So you mentioned, Steve, adoption. That's a question that Cal also asked on the Q&A. Is we've talked about all of this innovation and edge. How is adoption going to happen, and especially if the larger companies may not have the sort of same philosophy that we've been talking about? So not just to you, Steve, but to everybody. What's the adoption going to look like of edge, the way we're talking about it?
It's not just the big four, it's different industries, you know, security, the door lock guy, the lighting guy, the lift people, just everybody else who's in there. So it's quite a chunky.
I believe innovation will take over eventually. The way I see it is like the alarm companies, like house alarm companies, have it evolved fairly quickly and changed. We used to buy the alarming company, pay $50 a month. Now we don't do that. We work with other companies. So I think the innovation will be the dictator of who will take over.
And also my hope is that the real estate guys, the REITs, will actually, as they're getting smarter, start defining some of this stuff that, you know, the items have got to be able to talk. And I think it's got to be driven from the demand from the customers as well, the ends. And as the REITs are getting stronger and owning more property, and the bigger companies, they perhaps can actually be part of this thing to push for you know, more of a standard way of actually, you know, securely transferring the information in a one common way of doing it.
A lot of that, I think, will be driven by the economics, right? So once we as an industry can start to illustrate that more clearly, I think we'll see better adoption commercial level. That's where on the consumer side, I think it's going to be accelerated. But on the commercial side, there has to be an economic reason or regulatory. Just prior to jumping on this call, I was on the BTO Zoom meeting today talking about electrification and the economics of all of that. And it does seem like as an entity, the BTO seems to be driving towards that direction, with the core foundational piece of that being more intelligent building controls throughout. So I would suspect we're going to see more and more standards come out, or regulatory standards come out too, that are going to drive some of that adoption as well.
Anto, you are muted.
You're muted, Anto, yeah.
Ah, okay. Karen, Steve, any sort of other angles on adoption that can help us sort of figure this out? Innovation, economics.
Business outcomes.
I think just the reality of what, and Jim was mentioning, is what are we trying to accomplish, right? So I give an example, that one of the advantages of processing at the edge is if you have constrained networks, right? The network can't, for whatever variety of reasons, flow all the data you need to accomplish the goal. The network can be constrained because it's intermittent and unreliable. It can be constrained because it doesn't have the throughput. It can be constrained because it costs too much to send the data. So we see applications that are connected on cellular modems, and you can talk about your 4G and your 5G and your 6G and all of that stuff. Here's the G that matters, is how much they're going to charge you to send a piece of data over the network, right? So if you can process the data to make the decisions, identify the issues, use analytics, whatever, the only thing you have to send up over the network to the operators who need to know is the end result, not every bit of sensor data, right? That's an application-driven reason for looking at how you should apply edge computing to the problem, right? And going back to the original thing I was saying, it's not either or. We have to look at how we can use these different computing architectures to solve the problems. And I just feel there's, in some cases, an over focus that there's only one way to do it. It has to be at the cloud. And I don't think that's.
I think the other thing is if you start moving away from the technology and start moving to your mandatory requirements, actually back in our early days of the request for proposal, we could not believe the fistfights that broke out of what do you think the mandatory requirements of what it is we are doing are. And we spent days, months trying to ferret out those questions, and completely independent of technology. And the other problem is you can't keep it completely separated from technology, because every once in a while a new technology falls on you that absolutely redefines what you're doing. But the point is if you try to keep focused on what it is you're doing, completely independent of technologies, you will have new technologies fall out of the sky that you can't even imagine.
I would like to add one last thing. What Mark said, the outcomes. The ease of getting to the outcomes is also a major factor. No one likes to deal with the IT departments and be nice to them just to get IP address or have a port forwarding open and deal with the emails back and forth and learn what that company policies are. With this edge computing devices, the time to get your actionable item starts from the minute that you electrify that device. So, and you don't have to generate the value, you don't have to even deal with the IT department. So that adds a tremendous amount of value.
Any other thoughts on edge?
Well, Anto, I would say case studies, really good case studies and advertising built around it, marketing would be really helpful. I think we're early on, and when you think about when DDC first came out, there was a lot of effort to communicate the advantages of it. I think Edge is in that same area. We need those who have been successful deploying it need to talk about it. They need to get it into Ken Scaleris, in automated buildings. I mean, in other places. Honestly, it's marketing. I think will definitely help in this case.
So here's an interesting take from Gartner. They predict that the amount of enterprise generated data created and processed outside a traditional centralized data center or cloud will rise from 10% to 75% by 2025.
That does depend on what they mean by traditional.
Well, again, you can read into any of these you want to, but the point is that, again, data being collected, curated, analyzed at the edge is here and it's here now, and it's only increasing. And again, to reiterate what John's point and what I'd said earlier, it's not an either or, it's a combination hybrid of both edge and cloud.
A thought just sort of struck me is that Anna was talking earlier about the $20 chip, right? And I'm wondering whether there's any sort of study or people are thinking about the cost of managing edge. Because one of the things about the cloud is that it's kind of all in one place. It's all in data centers. I know it's distributed, but the cost of managing edge, is that likely to be a challenge?
It is a challenge, but there are tools to automate these systems, to manage these systems. And it is very similar to the computers, right? So managing the updates, managing the installations and security, there are tools for that now. We use an open source product called SaltStack, just got bought by VMware. So, and there are open source tools to manage edge devices as well. So yes, it is a challenge, but there are tools to make it easier for us.
And the cell phone is the model that, you know, it gets upgraded every week. You get a brand new operating system for your cell phone. And
but with both of these, and I'm familiar with both of them, obviously, it's very different conceptually to buildings of the past or building systems of the past that really don't get updated at all for decades.
Right.
Now we're talking about devices that get updated like weekly or daily or whatever.
Yeah, but Anto, the generation of the technology has to be different. The current VAS systems can't handle edge computing to begin with. So, you know, we're talking about new generation hardware, new generation technologies to do that. Yeah.
And I also think also the communication methodologies are going to change because, you know, all the innovation is coming, where they're trying to do a lot of stuff is through wireless technology, certainly in retail with, you know, Bluetooth beacons and wireless sensors and things, just because it can be managed cheaply, you can install cheaply, and you can access, and that may help with some sort of standard communication methodology as well.
That's a good point. I think Roger too, with the wireless and 5G. I noticed Brian Turner's just comment. There's a lot of 5G being deployed, and 5G companies are looking for, you know, applications, next generation technologies that are going to leverage the 5G infrastructure as well. We've noticed a big push in that, and again in the APAC market, you know, as 5G gets deployed, that these companies are looking for applications that can leverage the platforms.
So with that, we're at the top of the hour. This has been a fascinating conversation about innovation and then edge computing. So thank you, everybody. And I think we'll bring this to a close. Anybody want to make a last quick final comment on how excited they are about the edge?
I'm on the edge of my chair. Does that count?
I will nerd out a little bit and say how excited I am to watch all this unfold over the next 5 to 10 years, let's say.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for the attendees. And the video of this will be up by in the morning. And we shall see you next week on Monday Live. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.
bye-bye.